The gentleman from New York, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of the gentlemen for your testimony today. Secretary Geithner, I'd like to follow up on some of the questions by Congressman Kanjorski. And I'd like to address the AIG bonus issue in the context of lessons learned and how what occurred with AIG would impact the toxic asset plan, which you announced yesterday. Because for that plan to succeed, there must be cooperation between the government and the private sector. There must be trust, and there must be assurance that rules are in place and the rules won't be changed in the middle of the game. Now, based on your experience with AIG, as painful as that may have been over the last several weeks and months, what can you do to assure the private sector that if they do participate and they are profitable, and for whatever reason, justified or not, there was a public outcry, and we see the type of hysteria and hyperbole and histrionics, hyperventilating conspiracy theories and retaliatory legislation we saw last week, that these private institutions will not have their profits confiscated. And I'm thinking now especially of marginal institutions who may be deciding whether or not to participate. I also asked the question in the context of your testimony today and recent comments regarding excessive compensation. Now, if the government gets involved in setting compensation, that's going too far. If you're setting standards, could that be too vague? And would private institutions, will they be protected from their compensation being subjected to ex post facto moralizing and judgment? And with that,
thoughtful questions. Let me just go quickly through them. I think it's
take your time.
Absolutely right that we're not going to get through this financial crisis unless the system is willing to take risk, unless banks and private investors are able and willing to take risk again. That does require some confidence and clarity about the rules of the game going forward. I think it's an important obligation we share with the Congress to try to make sure we're providing that level of confidence and clarity. Also important, though, to make sure that we reassure the American people that the taxpayers' money is not going to go to reward failure, to encourage excessive risk-taking in the future.
If I could just interrupt with you for a second. All of us agree the AIG bonuses were wrong. But how do we protect against that without going too far?
It's a difficult judgment. As the Chairman said in response to a previous question, the choices we faced were very constrained by the fact that these were legal contracts, and we're a nation of laws, and we have to be very careful about the circumstance in which we raised questions about the government intervening with respect to legally valid contracts. But we do have an obligation now to go back and try to recoup those payments, and we're going to do that carefully and explore legal avenues in that context. Now, looking forward, I do think it's appropriate for the country to put in place strong standards that govern compensation practice across the financial community as a whole, because as we've seen, those can have systemic consequences, create a more fragile and stable system. And you're right, it's a difficult balance. The government should not be setting detailed or prescribing detailed regulations to govern amounts of compensation and their distribution. We have to hold to broad standards that, again, make sure that we're not encouraging short-term risk-taking at the expense of long-term stability. And here's one other example. You want to make sure that the people responsible for running the checks and balances in these firms, for running risk management, for doing the audit process, those people, too, are compensated adequately so you attract strong talent to run the checks and balances that our system depends on.
What's the timeline as to when you expect to have these guidelines in place and your legacy asset plan goes forward?
Our immediate priority is to lay out guidelines to apply the new legislative requirements on compensation that were passed as part of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. But we're going to move quickly, we hope, to lay out broad standards that help govern compensation practices in the future beyond those that would apply to institutions that receive taxpayer assistance.
On the legacy asset, toxic asset plan, do you intend to implement changes in mark-to-marketing?
As you know, I believe the SEC or the relevant legal authority has put out for comment some important new clarifications to the fair value accounting regime.
And what would Treasury's opinion be on that?
I want to be careful in how I respond to that, but I'll give you my initial reaction is they're a constructive set of changes. They provide a right balance between preserving confidence in the quality of public disclosure, which is very important to getting through this, but still address some of the complications of applying those provisions in a market like we're experiencing today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.